welcome. Thank you for joining us today on our Lunch and Learn on preventing family homelessness. We'll get started in a few more minutes. We're so glad to see you. Glad you chose to be here today. I just want to make sure that if you know during the presentation, if you have questions, that you can send those in advance. You can just click on questions there. And of course, you can ask questions throughout the webinar too. So give us a few more minutes for more of our friends to join us, but be thinking of your questions. If you have them now, put them in the questions tab on your screen, and we'll get to answer them. We're so glad. So good to see some old faces and new faces. My goodness, lots of love coming our way. Lots of love coming back to you. So we'll give it a few more minutes for more of our friends to join. Hello, for those of you just joining, welcome to the Mary's Place Lunch and Learn. Thanks for joining us today to learn more about preventing family homelessness. We're going to get started in a few minutes. We have some great panelists for you. Just a reminder, if you have questions you'd like to send in advance, please enter those by clicking on the questions there on your screen. And of course, you can always ask questions by putting them in there throughout the webinar. We're going to wait a few more minutes to make sure we get all of our friends that have signed up to join us, make sure they can find us here. So most importantly, thank you for taking time out of your day to learn more about the families experiencing homelessness in our community and what that will mean as this eviction moratorium is lifted. So grateful for you. All right, everyone, we have about 1 more minute. We're going to wait for our friends to join, but just want to say at the top of this, thank you for choosing to participate and learn through this Lunch and Learn time together on preventing family homelessness. We know that there will be a tsunami of families coming our way as this eviction moratorium is lifted, and we are excited that you want to learn more about that. We're going to get started in a few minutes, but just so you know, if you have questions throughout the webinar today, please click on the questions tab there, put your questions in there, and we'll try to get to all of those that we can during this Lunch and Learn. We want to be responsive to your questions, so please put them in there. Guess what? It's 12:05. We're going to jump right in now. I just want to say welcome. I'm Marty Hartman. I'm the director of Mary's Place. Thank you. I see some old friends and new friends, and grateful for each one of you. Washington's eviction moratorium will end on September 30th for hundreds, if not thousands, of families in our state who have been impacted financially by COVID, who are disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And their back rent will come due, and many will face homelessness. At today's Lunch and Learn, we want to talk about the impact that will have on families, on our ability to provide shelter and services, and what we can do as a community to address this crisis and the pending tsunami of family homelessness about to hit our shores. Before I introduce our panel and get started, I want to begin our time together by acknowledging the land on which we stand. We stand on the traditional home of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish, the Snohomish, and the Suquamish, who are, although not all recognized by the federal government, are still here today. I offer gratitude to elders and all other Coast Salish peoples, past, present, and future, who have made it possible for us to love, to live, and to work in this community. And I want to invite each one of you to seek authentic relationships with Indigenous communities. And most importantly, to learn about the past and present colonial impacts and move beyond acknowledgement to action. For those of you that are new with Mary's Place began more than 20 years ago as a single day center for women experiencing homelessness right here in downtown Seattle. Our drop-in day center is still at the heart of Mary's Place at 9th and Stewart, where we serve about 100 women a day, providing everything from basic necessities, showers, laundry, and dry, warm clothing, bras and panties, along with 2 meals a day and resources for housing and employment and shelter tonight and wellness. We were always open to serving children at our day center. But I'll have to say, in that first decade, we rarely saw a child come through our doors. There was enough shelter capacity right here in King County. But during the recession, that all changed. We started to see moms with children coming through our doors at a rapid rate, and we had no resources to offer them. There was no shelter capacity, and there was no funding. And we certainly didn't have the expertise to run overnight shelter. But we knew we had to do something. We would not just be bystanders. And so we opened our very first overnight shelter for women and children in 2011. And we have continued to develop our programming to address the growing needs in our community. Not long after that first shelter opened, we knew we needed to keep families together to address their housing needs together. And so we opened a shelter to include families that had mom and dad. And then we opened one with single dads. And then we offered shelter to extended families and families with pets and families who had lost everything caring for their sick child. That was the beginning of our Popsicle Place program. And just so you know, before COVID, we provided emergency shelter and meals, together with resources for housing, employment, and wellness for 800 moms, dads, and kids each night. And you know, Mary's Place runs the King County Family Shelter intake line. And before this pandemic, we knew we were so close to reaching our goal of no child sleeps outside. But last spring, the start of the pandemic, we had to close 4 smaller shelters to keep our guests and staff safe. So we currently have 500 beds across 5 sites in King County, a loss of 300 beds. We are currently working to add back that capacity as we prepare for families that will face homelessness as the state eviction moratorium ends later this month. And for those who aren't lucky enough to make it into shelter or can't come into shelter, our mobile outreach team works with those families and provides flexible funding from our Rapid Response Fund, just simply to help families address barriers and move them quickly back into housing. We've discussed some of those issues and programs in our past Lunch and Learns, and we invite you to watch those webinars that are available on our website to learn more about those programs. But truly, we all know that the safest place for a family to be is in their own home. And our focus today is keeping families in those hard-won homes. Our panel will share more about that effort, the impacts, the disproportionate impacts of homelessness on families, some of the work that's being done to address the needs of families facing housing instability as the eviction moratorium deadline approaches. And we're going to talk about what we need to do to scale that work and how you can all help us do that. So I have the pleasure of introducing our panel. These are amazing women in our community. So let me introduce Dominique Alex. She is our Mary's Place Chief Program Officer and oversees shelter and program services to families experiencing homelessness in our communities. And at Mary's Place, that includes our youth services, our health services, our outreach, our housing programs, our prevention and stability and our stability program. In her previous role, though, Dominique supported families in publicly funded comprehensive early learning programs and family support programs all across Washington state. We are so grateful to have you, Dominique. And next up is Allison Moon. She is our Mary's Place Director of Community Impact. And really, she's responsible for our community impact agenda. And that identifies gaps in policies and services and really drives change at the systems level together with government, family shelter providers, school district, and community partners. We are so grateful Allison is on our team. And I want to introduce you to Michele Thomas. She is the Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. That organization that Michele leads really led the effort along with state legislators who were our champions that resulted in some historic levels of investment in housing and homelessness in the last legislative session. So you can raise your hand, you can give them snaps, but let's thank them all for being here today. So thank you, panel. All right, so let's get started. These are the experts you've been waiting to hear from. I'm going to start with Allison. You've done a lot of research, both generally about the long-term effects of homelessness, the disproportionality among BIPOC families, and you've helped steward our own pilot programs. Can you share about that and some of the key learnings that are shaping Mary's Place response and advocacy? Take it away, Allison.
Thanks so much, Marty. So as Marty mentioned, my name is Allison and I use she, her pronouns. There's really so much that I could share here, but today I really want to highlight some of the things that we've learned and pilots we've undertaken in regards to prevention work. So when we talk about prevention work, we're really talking about keeping people housed. General research tells us that there are a number of factors that have been shown to put people at the greatest risk of experiencing homelessness. So these include being Black, Indigenous, or other person of color, prior histories of homelessness, being in the lowest income levels, staying in more informal living arrangements, being an immigrant household, or someone who communicates in a different language, survivors of domestic, intimate partner sexual violence, people with disabilities and disabling conditions, and prior histories of justice involvement or eviction. Additionally, there was some research done in this community by the Seattle Women's Commission and the King County Bar Association to better understand evictions in Seattle. And they found that 51.7% of tenants in eviction filings were people of color. 31.2% were Black tenants, experiencing eviction at a rate 4.5 times what would be expected based on their demographics in Seattle. When we talk about King County in general, between 2013 and 2017, 1 in 11 Black adults had an eviction in King County compared to 1 in 100 white adults. So we see the disproportionality showing up there. We also know that COVID has had major impacts on households and their ability to pay rent and remain stable in their housing. In order to better understand the impacts on the Mary's Place community, Mary's Place team reached back out to families in late 2020 that had previously moved through our services to housing. And in total, we were able to talk with 196 families to better understand how COVID had impacted them. The good news at that time was that around 93% of the families we talked to were still housed, which shows that the eviction moratorium was working. But where the news is a little less optimistic is that around 55% had not been able to pay their rent every month since the onset of the pandemic. 79% of the families who disclosed being behind in their rent identified as families of color. So again, that disproportionality shows up. And at the time we connected with families, they were behind on their rent by an average amount of around $2,900. In our King County community, between August and December of 2020, there were 25,136 King County households who expressed a need for rental assistance through the King County Eviction Prevention and Rental Assistance Program. Of the households who received rental assistance, Black, Indigenous, and people of color households made up 76%, and 55% of all households that received rental assistance had one or more children in their household. And for that effort, in that project, the average amount that households received was just over $4,100 in rental assistance. Now the latest pulse survey from the US Census Bureau with the data that ranges from July 21st to August 2nd, 2021 indicates that there are 5,900 individual members of families with children in the Seattle metro area that stated they were very likely to have to leave their home in the next 2 months due to eviction. We're also hearing from other prevention partners in the community that are doing this work that the average amount of assistance needed in rental assistance at this time is coming in at an average of around $10,000 per household. And that's an amount that covers arrearages as well as a few months of future rent to really help get families stable. So all this indicates that disparities exist, the need for rental assistance is great in this community. And you're going to hear more about some of the successes in the last legislative session when Michele shares, and more about the work that Mary's Place is undertaking to meet the need when Dominique shares. But I do want to share just a little bit with you all about some of the work that Mary's Place has already done to support families in remaining housed. So Katrina, could you pull up that slide? Thank you. So as you all will see on this slide, Mary's Place has completed 4 pilot prevention projects. So each project provided some level of rental assistance and focused on highly vulnerable families. And each project was funded through private dollars, which really gave us lots of flexibility to design projects that really meet families' needs. Families served through the projects were primarily Black, Indigenous, and people of color, single parent households who had been impacted by COVID-19, as well as had experienced extensive systemic racism, educational disparities, healthcare disparities, and that's all on top of the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. So I'm proud to share that at the time each of these projects came to a close, every family that had been served remained housed. So we really found that providing light touch rental assistance had a huge impact in supporting families to move towards housing stability. And we really hope to build off of these successes by bringing the lessons we've learned through these pilot projects you see listed here to inform our current and upcoming prevention work. We also know that as we move further upstream, we'll be better able to address equity and disparities. So that covers it for me right now. Marty, I'll go ahead and pass it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. So great to hear about all the programs, the work that you have led, informing some new best practices as we go forward. Hey, everybody, if you have questions for Allison, please type those into the questions tab on your screen there. We want to make sure that we can answer those at the end of our presentation here. And I have the pleasure of welcoming Michele. Hi, Michele. Can you introduce yourself and the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance and share some of the incredible wins from the last legislative session that will help to address some of the issues that Allison talked about? We're glad you're here, Michele.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, my name is Michele Thomas with the Housing Alliance, and my pronouns are she, her. And yeah, it's true that we had a lot of incredible victories last session. The Housing Alliance is an organization that believes that everyone should have the opportunity to live in a safe, affordable home. And we engage advocates statewide to engage in public policy advocacy to advance affordable housing and tenant protections to prevent and end homelessness in Washington state. And in the last legislative session, which ended in April, there was tremendous gains for affordable housing, for tenant protections and homelessness prevention. Even though the session was virtual, it was an incredible opportunity, and advocates from across the state worked closely with us to push lawmakers for significant investments in affordable housing and homelessness and to pass key protections. Really important protections against eviction were passed, some of which we had been fighting for several years. We also secured historic amounts of money in the state budget for affordable housing and homelessness. And actually, if you wouldn't mind putting up the first slide that I sent, that's a summary of some of the key protections that were passed. Our legislative champions, our housing and homelessness champions, especially Representative Nicole Macri from the 43rd Legislative District, which includes Capitol Hill and the University District, and Senator Patty Kuderer from the 48th Legislative District, which includes Bellevue and Kirkland, really worked hard with us to secure these victories, in addition to other key lawmakers from across the state. So on your screen, you can see some of the key victories. This isn't all of them. It's all I could fit in on one slide. They are some of the most important ones, including, like I said, key protections against evictions and key investments in housing and homelessness. So Representative Macri passed House Bill 1236. This bill outlaws what we call no cause evictions. Landlords now can only evict for the reasons that are outlined in the bill. Senator Kuderer passed Senate Bill 5160. These are really important protections against evictions for non-payment of rent. In addition to those protections, Governor Jay Inslee has first had a moratorium on evictions, has most recently updated it with a proclamation that is a bridge to the protections that have been put in place, because it takes time to put some of these protections in place, especially those in Senate Bill 5160. And so he has provided an extra layer of protections until September 30th that we'll talk about more in a second. House Bill 1277 by Representative Tim Ormsby from over in Spokane significantly increases resources to prevent homelessness via a new document recording fee on real estate related transactions. It's going to provide approximately $290 million additional dollars each 2 years to prevent and end homelessness in Washington state. In addition to that, there was over $1 billion in rental assistance secured, $175 million in the state's capital budget to build affordable housing through the State Housing Trust Fund, $120 million to secure rapidly properties throughout the state that can be used temporarily for shelter and to be transitioned into permanent housing. You're seeing some of this in King County, which is also funded in King County with the Health and Housing Initiative. Also importantly, an additional $30 million for the Housing and Essential Needs Rental Assistance Program, which is a rental assistance program for people with disabilities. So next slide, please. Absolutely tremendous victories that would not have been able to be won without advocates across the state and key housing champions. But in terms of eviction protections, there's really important protections that tenants have in Washington state. This slide provides details. We don't have time to get into all the details. So I just want to give you some quick highlights. And to be clear, this on the slide, these are highlights. There are other important, really critical details. So to summarize quickly, the state level protections that are in place with both the bills that were passed with the governor's bridge proclamation, there's three key points, actually four. First one is in King County, tenants also have local protections that layer on top of these state level protections. Not every tenant in King County has these, but many tenants in jurisdictions, and also the tenants who live in unincorporated King County. King County includes places like White Center. So it's important to know if you have local protections, and if so, what extra protections that add on top of the state level ones. But importantly, all tenants who are behind in rent right now or become behind in rent in the next couple of months need to be actively seeking rental assistance, and should be sure to get documentation of any kind that you are attempting to seek rental assistance. Actively seeking rental assistance protects you from your landlord proceeding with evictions through September 30th at least. If your landlord gives you any paperwork, especially an offer of a repayment plan, tenants need to respond to it within 14 days. Landlords have to provide you with a reasonable repayment plan. If they provide you with something that you do not think is reasonable, you need to respond and provide them with a counter offer, but you can't ignore it. You have to respond. Also, and this was a critical protection one in the last legislative session, all low-income tenants in Washington state facing eviction for any reason, either non-payment of rent or for any other allegation by your landlord that they are giving you that makes and want to make you move. Let's say they assert that you are not abiding by the rules, any reason your landlord has given you to move, you have the right to free legal counsel. So tenants who earn less than 200% of the federal poverty line, and on the screen, I tried to provide an example of that, are entitled to a free attorney. If you're not given a free attorney, then the eviction should not proceed until you are provided with that attorney. So for King County tenants, this right to counsel program is not yet in place. It's not yet in place anywhere in Washington state because it was just passed and funded in the last session. People are working really hard to get it into place. In King County, it's going to be run by the Housing Justice Project, and they anticipate that will be in place by mid-September. In order to access an attorney, though, the next slide will have a phone number that you need to go through in order to get placed with an attorney. But in some, it's really important for tenants and for social workers who support tenants or family members who support tenants to understand all of these layers of protections. And the best way to understand that is to access legal assistance or advice. And so the last slide has information for King County residents who are facing eviction. These are all great resources. The WashingtonLawHelp.org is something that people can access on their own. They've got training videos. They have a lot of information in multiple languages. And that's information you can use just to get background. If you are facing an eviction, you should call the Eviction Defense Screening Line. In addition to that, the Tenants Union of Washington State's hotline can give you some information on your rights. And again, the King County Housing Justice Project, even for tenants who don't qualify for a free attorney through the new program. So if you earn more than 200% of the federal poverty line, you still may be able to access legal assistance through the Housing Justice Project. And so lots of really important information. And of course, in order to seek rental assistance, you can contact King County directly through that phone number or through that website. So that's just a quick summary. There's a lot of information, so I just really want to urge folks to get information on your rights.
Wow, Michele, thank you. That is an incredible amount of information and very helpful information. But I do have a follow-up question. We know that last session's wins are a really great start, but not near enough to meet the need that we're seeing. What more do you think needs to be done, and how can our community help?
Yeah, thank you. I agree. Even though last session was so tremendous and a lot was done, it's still not enough. The Census Bureau data that was cited a little earlier in the webinar, show that there's a lot of tenants who are currently behind on rent, despite the fact that there's a lot of rental assistance that we're attempting to get out the door throughout the state. Over 150,000 renters in Washington are behind on rent, and many of those tenants are households with children under the age of 18. But another really worrisome thing is that many tenants who are current on rent are hanging on by a thread. That same census data shows that over 1 million renters in Washington state are relying on really unsustainable means to meet their basic needs. Things like credit cards, depleting their savings in their retirement, and relying on friends and family to help them get by. Simultaneously, and many of you have probably heard this, tenants across Washington state are facing really steep rent increases, and this is happening all over. The governor's moratorium, which ended on July 1st, used to prevent rent increases, but that is no longer the case. So landlords can raise the rent if the tenants are not on a current fixed term lease. So all of these tenants who are hanging on by a thread may be pushed into the category of the tenants who are unable to pay rent because of these steep rent increases. So that's extremely worrisome. The next legislative session starts in January 2022, and we will have another opportunity to advance housing justice. It will be a short session, so it won't be as long as the last one, so it'll be more constrained. But we need advocates from across the state, many more voices in King County to join the housing movement. If you want to engage with the Housing Alliance and learn how to get involved, you can sign up for our action alerts via our website, and I'll put our website in the chat in just a second. We also have an annual advocacy day where tenants can engage with other advocates from your legislative district and from across the state, and where you get to meet directly with your state lawmakers. We also have our annual conference on ending homelessness, which is coming up in early October. All of these are really great opportunities to get more engaged in the housing justice movement. And lastly, the elections are coming up in November, and it's going to be really important to vote for housing champions. So make sure before you vote, where folks stand on affordable housing and homelessness.
Wow, thank you, Michele. So helpful, such great information and great action steps that we can all take. If you have questions for Michele, now's your time to type those into the questions tab on your screen there, because we want to make sure we'll bring Michele back after Dominique presents, and you can ask her questions as well. So thank you, Michele. So appreciate you taking the time to be here. And Dominique, you're heading up Mary's Place work to provide rental assistance for funding for families. And we're so grateful for you for leading this work. Can you share about that program and how families will receive this assistance?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Dominique and I use she, her pronouns. Thank you for being with us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the what. And we recently received a contract with King County to be an eviction prevention provider to support families who have fallen behind in their rent due to the COVID-19 crisis that we all are experiencing. So between now and December 31st, we will be working with families directly and providing some of that back rent to help them avoid eviction and having to experience the traumatizing experience of coming into shelter. And we know that our families that we are serving, a lot of them are single moms, predominantly African American, they're DV survivors, they're asylum seekers, they're refugees. And so those experiences of coming into shelter would be very traumatic for them. And so we are trying to avoid that by getting this monies out. We also know that the needs will go beyond the end of this year. And so we are working to secure additional funding to build upon this comprehensive prevention program. That, like Michele mentioned earlier, there was money given out, but there is not enough money to go around to fill the needs of what we've been experiencing as a result of COVID-19 and our families falling behind. And so one of the things I would say is that we're building that flexible rapid response fund for our families to either return to housing or stay in their housing. So no one's child sleeps outside. Allison talked about $10,000 being the average of what we're seeing go out to families right now. That is almost 4 times the amount that we have seen in the past. And so we know that the needs are very great, and we don't want anyone to fall in the cracks. We know that there will be families that will not have access to know where to go or who to turn to in those moments where they are being evicted. So the resources and getting that information translated is one of our top priorities, and working with other partners to make sure that they reach the people that maybe we don't have access to. And so that is what our program is planning to do and currently is doing to help families avoid the eviction crisis that will begin to happen. And if it already hasn't, as soon as the moratorium is lifted. So thank you. And I'll pass it back to Marty.
Wow. Thank you, Dominique. Thank you for choosing to lead this work here at Mary's Place. We are so grateful for you. And everyone, if you have questions for Dominique again, or other members of the panel, now's your time to put those questions into the questions tab on your screen. And I just want to say thank you to this amazing panel. And we want to get to your questions from the audience. So Katrina is going to help us steward those questions and call them out for us. So take it away, Katrina.
Great, thank you all. We're getting some great questions coming through. First question to Allison. What specific housing provisions have been made for evictees? How many beds would there be and where? And who is managing that?
Thanks, Katrina. So the reality is that we are still in a place where we do not have adequate shelter capacity to meet the need that currently exists. And there currently is not a plan to, like a system-wide plan to expand shelter opportunities for families with children. Michele did mention the health through housing work that's happening through King County. So there will be new resources coming on board there. But those are targeted towards people who are experiencing chronic homelessness, and families often don't meet that definition. So there is not a set aside amount of beds for evictees that are leaving housing and coming to the homeless service system, which is part of the reason that we are really invested in figuring out how we keep people housed, because our system is not set up for an influx.
Great, thank you. And for the next question, might be a few of you to help answer, but maybe to you first again, Allison. What is the expected fallout in terms of numbers of families evicted? How are they handling back rent? Is that just forgiven, or are landlords allowed to ask for it just all on the first day, post-eviction deadline? How long essentially will people have to repay if they need to?
Michele, I think you had pulled some really great data from the Pulse survey. So I don't know if you want to maybe jump in to tackle this one to start.
Yeah, sure. So, a lot hinges on the rental assistance programs getting out the door and tenants knowing what their rights are. But in terms of Washington State, what we're facing right now, in terms of the last census data survey, it's called the Pulse survey, and it was done between July 21st and August 2nd. It showed that over 9%, almost 10% of all renters in Washington State are currently behind on rent. That's 148,687 renters. That's a lot of folks. It's really disproportionate though, in terms of its impact by race. Over 52% of Black renter households who responded said that they were behind, and 13% of Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx renter households were behind, versus 8% of white households. In terms of households with children under the age of 18, in the Seattle metro area, 48,000 of households with children under the age of 18 reported that they were behind on rent during that time period. Additionally, almost 107,000 tenants in Washington State reported that they were not at all confident that they can make next month's rent. An additional almost 200,000 tenants were only slightly confident that they can make next month's rent. For respondents with children under the age of 18 in their household, 25,618, so about 26,000 households were not at all confident that they could pay next month's rent. And in another over 60,000 tenants with children under the age of 18 in their household were only slightly confident that they can make next month's rent. If we look at that just in the Seattle metro area, tenants who were not at all confident that they could meet rent, who have children under the age of 18, 17,000 households, and then almost 28,000 households in the Seattle metro area with children under the age of 18 were only slightly confident that they could not make next month's rent. And additionally, like I said earlier, there's well over 1 million renters in Washington State who are current on rent, who are in really precarious situations and who are facing rent increases that could really swing them into the category of folks who are unable to make rent. So overall, we're in an extraordinarily precarious situation in Washington State. There is a disproportionate impact, especially by race and by the status of having children in your household under the age of 18. So it's really scary what's going to happen after September 30th. And we'll be watching closely. Mary's Place will be watching closely. State lawmakers will be watching closely. But as we talked about earlier, I think what this all means is that it is excellent that we were able to pass all these protections and make all these investments, but we are not done. We are a long way from being done, and we need to leverage the opportunity with the next legislative session, plus local protections, especially at the city level and the county level, to add additional layers of insulation against evictions and homelessness.
Great, thank you so much, Michele. I have a next question. Dominique, if you're able to answer, are Mary's Place eviction prevention resources limited to a geographic area?
Yes, so we serve families that are in the greater King County area as well as the Seattle metropolitan area. So those are our priorities. I will also tell you that if someone is outside of that space, we work very closely with our partners to refer them to get the assistance as opposed to just saying we can't help you.
Thank you. And for Allison, for the Alumni Fund and flexible funding, does that program support families who have left their apartment?
So for the Alumni Fund, that was a pilot short period of time. It's closed. And that was to help people become current on rent. So that project was solely for households that were currently housed, but facing, being behind in their rent. That being said, families that had already transitioned out of their housing were connected with our outreach team to work in that way. One thing that I do know that is happening in this community is people are choosing to self-evict or leave their own apartments because they have a significant amount owing and they fear that they won't be able to get caught up and that their landlord will move towards eviction. And part of the challenge in that is that it then makes them ineligible for a lot of the resources that could have helped them to cover some of the arrearages and back rent had they remained housed. So, Michele mentioned earlier that it was critical for tenants to follow up with communications from their landlords. So just want to reiterate that. And the other thing that I will say is we know that this is a gap, right? So for families who have left their housing that need assistance with relocation or obtaining new housing, there's not a good pool of public resources to address that. And so that's really where Mary's Place is looking to utilize some private dollars to fill those gaps and build programming that can assist people with relocation if they've made the decision to already leave their housing. So I think that's just an opportunity for us, and just a kind of another way that we hope to use our rapid response fund is to really fill those gaps that we see are coming up in the system.
Thank you, Allison. This question for Dominique. Is there or will there be an order of priority of who gets help first based on their situational needs? For example, would a victim of domestic violence be prioritized? Would a family be prioritized over an individual? Or is it generally first come, first serve?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I would say is that we prioritize how things come in. So it is kind of a first come, first serve, because we kind of worked that order, but we also prioritize as an agency families. We have a day center that we have single women in, and so we have an opportunity to help some single adults and avoid some of that eviction possibility for them as well, and other single adults. But we like to partner with our other community folks who serve youth and single adults very specifically, who also have an opportunity to be an eviction prevention provider, because we know that they will meet their needs best comprehensively, because that's what they do on a daily basis. And so as things come in, we prioritize how we can serve them best, or do a direct handoff to a provider that can best meet their needs.
Yeah, and then Katrina, can I add also, this is something that we kind of tried to figure out during our pilot work. With our pilot projects, we had a small amount of resources and a much larger pool of people in need. So we had to figure out how are we going to prioritize who receives the resources. And so we really looked at some of those risk factors that I mentioned earlier that put people at greatest risk of experiencing homelessness. So being Black, Indigenous, people of color, being a survivor of domestic, intimate partner, sexual violence, being a refugee or immigrant. So all of that whole list that I mentioned of the risk factors, we really were able to kind of hone in on a practice to make sure that when we have limited resources, we could prioritize those who are most vulnerable, because our goal is really to make sure these dollars are hitting the households that would have otherwise ended up experiencing homelessness. So got a little bit of practice with our pilot work and are hoping that as we design our Mary's Place prevention work as an organization, that we can build that in, knowing that we're going to have limited resources for a much larger need.
Great, thank you both. And for this, I have two questions here. I think maybe Marty, if you might be able to help answer. Does Mary's Place need any support getting their 4 shelters back open and ready?
Oh, absolutely. It is our goal to regain those 300 beds we lost in the pandemic. We know we had to close our smaller sites because we had to de-intensify or create social distancing space. So we're really looking to have different types of buildings that are safer and healthier for our families. Individual rooms with individual bathrooms are what we're looking for. So of course, hotels are perfect. In some instances, former hospitals or former nursing homes might work for us. As you know, we typically go into buildings that are slated for demolition. Our community makes them sparkle, and then we call them home for now. We are looking at a couple potential properties now that we hope will work out. And if they do, please stay tuned on our website. We'll be doing many shout outs for help. We need people to stock the shelves, to put diapers and wipes and school supplies. We also need people to come in and put the beds together and make those beds for the first time. So it feels like home when our families walk in for the very first time. So if you sign up on our volunteer sheet, you'll get that information, but please stand by. We are not giving up. We know that we need more beds, and it will be up to our community to help us find those. And if you have any leads on any type of those buildings, please make sure to let us know. You can reach out to me directly or any of our team members, and we'll get that, and we'll search down those potential properties that we can move into for a short period of time while they're being slated for redevelopment. So thanks for the great question.
Great, thank you. And then this next question, is there any help for people to find jobs?
Oh, lots of help, right? We have lots of community partners that do this work. We partner our guests with those agencies that are doing this work. Even our own employment specialist and stability specialist are working with families to identify. As you know, there are lots of jobs available. Trying to find those jobs that will be financially sustainable for these families is critical, as well as finding that childcare. And our youth services team is working diligently to make sure that everybody has childcare resources that needs them so that they can go to work. And with the start of school coming back in session, that will help. Many families had to stay home. They didn't have a safety net where others could watch their children while they went to work. So they had to sacrifice their jobs. And so we're hopeful for a good start to the school year, for more childcare options and for employment options for our families that will help them to secure a living wage. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you. And this next question for maybe Allison or Dominique. I have heard that one of the fastest growing homeless population is the elderly and veterans. Is Mary's Place also addressing those issues, or just families and children?
I can jump in here. So, Dominique, or maybe it was Marty, or both actually, mentioned the work done at our drop-in day center. And I will say that this is a trend we've been seeing there as well, that we've been seeing a huge increase over the past really couple of years in regards to the number of visits by older adult women. And so it's certainly something that's on our mind. A lot of the work we're doing in regards to prevention really is focused on families with children, but our services at the day center have had to adjust and flex to really meet the needs of people that are showing up. So I would say that's the space in which we're really, working to address service to older adults. And we see fewer veterans in our services in general, and work to get them connected to other organizations that serve veterans explicitly. So I would say that's really where we are in regards to addressing those populations at this time.
Great, thank you. And then Michele, if you might be able to speak a little to this. Is there a chance the eviction moratorium will be extended beyond September?
Yeah, sure. So it's unclear if the governor will do that. If the governor did do it, extend the bridge at least, that would be public pressure would be needed. because there are many who are opposed to these protections who are very vocal. But I want to be really clear that the moratorium technically ended as of July 1st. So there is no moratorium in place. What there are bridge protections, a bridge proclamation that adds additional layers of protection against evictions that are on top of the state laws and local protections that may also be in place for King County residents. So the moratorium is over, but there are the protections we talked about. I know it's confusing because there are so many layers of protection. So, going back to what we've said many times, if a tenant faces eviction at all, it's going to be really important to immediately access information on their rights through one of the resources that we shared earlier. But in terms of, what happens after September 30th, I think if we continue to see a rise in COVID cases throughout the state and in King County because of the Delta variant, if we continue to see a sluggish economy, if we continue to see rental assistance programs being slow to get out the door, the right to counsel not yet in place, these are the key protections for tenants. I think that there is a good case to be made that more protections need to continue to be extended beyond the September 30th deadline, because if not, we may indeed see a very significant increase in homelessness throughout Washington state.
Thank you, Michele. And I have another question, I think, for you, possibly Allison, but earlier you shared several resources for families who may be facing eviction. But I do have a question. Is there an active updated list of where families who are facing eviction can turn to for help? I find that families who are sent to 211 coordinated entry lose hope as soon as they hear 211.
Yeah, I think that there's multiple resources available. I think the most important thing for any family to first do if they face eviction is to see if they qualify for a free attorney. So contacting that eviction screening hotline that was on the resource list is really important. And again, any family or household that earns less than 200% or less of the federal poverty line is entitled to a free attorney. And if you're not provided one, the eviction should not move forward until you are provided one. For tenants who earn more than that, you still have opportunities to seek legal assistance. If you're in King County, you can skip 211 and directly contact the Housing Justice Project directly to get information on your rights. You can also contact the Tenants Union of Washington State. Another resource actually for King County residents that was not on that list is Solid Ground. They also have a tenant rights counseling program. Every tenant in Washington State, despite your income, is entitled now to free mediation if you're facing eviction. And that is up and running in King County already. So there are a lot of resources. WashingtonLawHelp.org, which is run by the Northwest Justice Project, is an absolutely fantastic resource. It's got a lot of information, including a lot of information in languages other than English, a lot of tutorials, and also written information on a whole host of topics beyond just housing and homelessness. That is a really useful resource that we highly encourage folks to utilize.
Great, thank you so much, Michele. And that appears to be the last question so far. So we do have a few minutes if anyone does have another question, or if any panelists would like to share anything brief in addition to some of the other questions that have come through already. Okay, well, I will pass it back to you, Marty. And again, just for all the attendees, I will be sending a follow-up email so we can certainly answer questions offline later if you do have any questions that come up.
Wow, thank you, Katrina, for leading the question and answers. And I just want to say thank you to our amazing panelists for their wisdom and insight, and really to all of you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. If you have additional questions or would like to talk to someone on our team, please feel free to reach out, right? We'd love to talk to you and answer your questions. And If you're interested, there are lots of ways to support Mary's Place and families through this effort. You can make a donation to support the Rapid Response Fund to help keep families safe, sheltered, or in their own homes at marysplaceseattle.org. You know, it costs about an average of $35 a night to keep a child in shelter, and those funds could be used to keep families in housing too. So any support you can provide will help those families that are falling through the gaps. Our Shine Gala event is coming up. It's a really fun singing competition and auction, and it'll be virtual this year, so don't miss it. Watch for more information about that this week. It's on October 1st, and I hope you'll join us on that day. And we are reintroducing in-person volunteer opportunities as we can safely. So check out our website for the most current opportunities. And we'll be doing more lunch and learn events to share about information and other aspects of the work that we do together with our partners to address and prevent family homelessness. And we'll hope to see you at those as well. So stay tuned for more information coming. And today, last but not least, you'll see a survey from us right after this lunch and learn. I hope you'll take a few minutes to let us know what your thoughts are about the presentation and how we can make these sessions more useful for you. So please share your ideas for other topics that you want to learn about too, because we want to be responsive to you. But most importantly, thank you for being you. Thank you for loving your neighbors. Thank you for loving the families in our community. And we hope to see you again soon and have a great afternoon. Thank you, panelists. You're the best. Thank you, everyone. Big love coming at ya. Take care now. Bye.